and welcome to my comprehensive Lyney guide. Since the release of the Overture trailer, I've become a big fan of Lyney as a character, and even more of one after the release of his gameplay. In this video, I'm going to be covering everything you need to know about Lyney, including his role in the game, base stats, kit, constellations, energy requirements, best artifacts and weapons, best teams, combos and rotations, pros and cons, and his overall tier ranking. So if you're interested in learning more about Lyney, then be sure to stick around for the rest of the video. Now let's get started. Lyney is a 5-star power bow character who uses charge shots to deal single target damage. His damage capabilities are supported by his elemental skill's stack-based scaling and elemental burst's short yet explosive AoE damage. This is further amplified by both of his Ascension passives, making him a solid DPS character worth getting for certain team archetypes. Character base stats should always be looked at to get a general idea of how they operate. Lyney has reasonable numbers for a DPS unit. Something worth noting is his low base defense. He has the second lowest in the entire game, only being behind Baiju. Although he has a slightly higher HP pool and the ability to heal himself with his elemental skill, having this low of defense makes him very squishy. Because of this, he'll often require a defensive unit that provides shielding, healing, and/or resistance to interruption. Lyney's Ascension stat is crit rate. When paired with his best in slot artifact set Marchesi Hunter, he needs little to no additional crit rate in his artifact stats. However, this will force more optimization towards stats like crit damage, attack, and energy recharge. Now onto his kit. Starting with his normal attack, Card Force Translocation. Lyney can perform up to 4 normal attacks, with his third attack doing a 2-shot sequence. His charge attack, which is where his gameplay is centered around, has 2 charge levels. The first level shoots a regular pyro arrow, dealing pyro damage. Charging it to level 2 changes it to a prop arrow. Prop arrows deal pyro damage and upon hitting an enemy summons a Grinmalkin hat. The hat taunts nearby enemies once every 5 seconds per enemy. It also inherits a percentage of Lyney's max HP and deals a pyrotechnic strike at a nearby enemy when destroyed or upon its duration expiring. The pyrotechnic strike deals pyro damage and only one hat can exist at any given time. Alongside the Grinmalkin hat, hitting an enemy with a prop arrow consumes a portion of Lyney's HP while he's above 60% HP to gain a prop surplus stack. This caps at 5 stacks and clears when he is out of combat for 30 seconds. Lyney's prop arrows occasionally deal Numa-aligned pyro damage in the form of a Spirit Breath Thorn. If this hits an enemy that is Uziah aligned, the enemy is temporarily paralyzed. Next is his elemental skill, Bewildering Lights. Casting the skill button causes Lyney to do a flourish, clearing all prop surplus stacks obtained and dealing AoE pyro damage to enemies that are in front of him. The damage dealt scales with the number of prop surplus stacks cleared, and clearing stacks allows him to heal himself based on his max HP. Skill has a 15-second cooldown. Do note that you won't get the healing portion if no stacks are cleared when using his skill. If a Grinmalkin hat is on the field upon casting his elemental skill, it will explode and deal AoE pyro damage equal to that of a pyrotechnic strike. The damage the Malkin hat does in this manner is considered charge attack damage. Lyney's Elemental Burst Wonders trick, Miracle Parade, transforms him into a Grinmalkin cat that can move around and deals an instance of pyro damage to nearby enemies. When its duration expires, he dismisses and deals AoE pyro damage, summons a Grinmalkin hat, and is granted a prop surplus stack. You can actively cancel his Elemental Burst by pressing his Elemental Skill button. His burst costs 60 energy and has a 15-second cooldown. Now let's look at his passives, starting with his Ascension 1 passive, Perilous Performance. When Lyney consumes HP from firing a prop arrow, the Grinmalkin hat restores 3 energy to him and increases its damage by 80% of his attack upon hitting an enemy. This helps alleviate his energy needs and increases the damage done by the Grinmalkin hat. His Ascension 4 passive Conclusive Ovation grants Lyney buffs when damaging enemies affected by pyro. Firstly, the damage dealt increases by 60%. Secondly, for each pyro party member in the team, the damage dealt increases by an additional 20%. This caps at 100% increased damage, requiring 2 additional pyro characters in your team. This passive heavily incentivizes teams that have high pyro uptime, like Monopyro, Burning, and in some cases Melt. Lyney's Exploration passive, Trivial Observations, displays the location of nearby resources unique to Fontaine on the minimap. Having these resources located for you makes collecting new Fontaine resources easier to do. For talent priority, you want to level his normal attacks first since he is a charge attack DPS character, with most of his damage coming from prop arrows. His elemental skill and burst are of equal priority and mainly depends on if you're using his burst every rotation or not. Because Lyney will be in teams consisting of 1 or more additional power units alongside the fact that his burst costs only 60 energy, he needs little to no energy recharge in his stats. In triple pyro teams, you can run around 100 to 120 ER. In double pyro teams, these requirements rise to about 130 to 140 ER, and often reach the higher end if you're using shielders. For artifacts, 4-piece Marchesi Hunter will be his go-to set as both the 2-piece and 4-piece effects benefit him greatly. He's able to gain max stacks of its 4-piece effect through his prop arrows, increasing his elemental burst and skills damage in rotations where they're used at the end. 4-piece Shimenawa's Reminiscence, Vermilion Hereafter, and Lava Walker are his next best sets. While Lava Walker performs more consistently, if you're bursting every rotation or in a double pyro team, then Vermilion and Shim perform better. The Desert Pavilion Chronicle set can be used on Lyney as its 4-piece effect boosts charge attack damage by a considerable amount. However, its 2-piece gives Animo damage bonus and its domain is just not efficient to farm for him. Sets like Retracing Bolide, 2-piece mixes, and 4-piece Wanderer's Troop are usable but don't perform as well compared to the other sets. Among the 2-piece mixes, his best performing ones on average are 2 attack, 2 crimson, and 2 attack, 2 attack. For main sets, you will almost always run Attack Sands, Power Damage Goblet, and Crit Circlet. If you're really struggling to get his burst up every rotation, then you can opt for an ER Sands instead. However, there won't be many situations, if any, where that will be happening. Lyney's best in slot weapon is the first Great Magic. It provides crit damage and its passive boosts charge attack damage and attack based on the number of same element party members, making it perfect for him. His next best 5-star options are Aqua Simulacra and Thundering Pulse because they're also crit damage stat weapons. Aqua Simulacra's low base attack is fine since Lyney gains attack from buffs from many external sources like Bennett. Additionally, it provides both an HP and damage increase, giving Lyney slightly more survivability as well as dealing extra damage. Thundering Pulse provides an attack increase in its passive at base. However, the rest of its passive is basically useless since it only buffs normal attack damage. Regardless, it being a crit damage stat weapon makes it a top choice. Other 5-star options like Polar Star, Hunter's Path, and Skyward Harp follow up afterwards, but because they're crit rate stat weapons, just make sure that if you're running 4-piece Marchesi Hunter to have less crit rate in your substats. Opting to run other artifact sets instead may be better for such weapons if you can't get enough crit damage to make up for it. Polar Star specifically prefers an alternate rotation to take advantage of its passive stacks. Ammo's Bow is the last of his 5-star options, however it's currently unknown if its passive effect applies to Grinmalkin hats. Regardless of if it did or didn't, its performance would be less than or about equal to his best 4-star options at R5. For non-5-star options, his main ones are Scion of the Blazing Sun, Prototype Crescent, and Song of Stillness. Blackcliff and Hamayumi perform similarly, but getting high refinements for these weapons takes some time as one costs Star Glitter and the other is obtained through farming. Other 4-star options include Viridescent Hunt and Moon's Moon, but they don't perform that well even at R5 compared to some of the other choices at R1. His first constellation, Whimsical Wonders, allows Lyney to have 2 Grinmalkin hats at once. Additionally, prop arrows will summon 2 hats and grant an extra prop surplus stack. This effect can occur once every 15 seconds. His damage output increases by about 12% with its constellation compared to C0. His second constellation, Loquacious Cudgeling, grants Lyney a crisp focus stack for every 2 seconds that he's on the field. Each stack increases his crit damage by 20%, capping at 3 stacks. The effect clears when Lyney leaves the field. This constellation effectively gives him up to 60% free crit damage at max stacks, which eases artifact optimization for some players. His damage output increases by about 13% with this constellation in comparison to C1. His Constellation 3, Prestidigitation, increases the level of his normal attack by 3. His Infirminiers are the first ever constellations in the game to increase normal attack levels. His damage output increases by about 9% with this constellation compared to C2. His fourth constellation, Well Versed, Well Rehearsed, decreases enemies' power resistance by 20% for 6 seconds after hitting them with a pyro charge attack. This includes both his level 1 and level 2 charge shot. His damage output increases by about 8% with this constellation compared to C3. His fifth constellation, To Pierce Enigmas, increases the level of his elemental burst by 3. This leaves his elemental skill as a talent that won't benefit from constellation upgrades. His damage output increases by about 4% with this constellation compared to C4. Lastly, his Constellation 6, Guarded Smile. When Lyney shoots a prop arrow, he fires a Pyrotechnic Strike reprised that deals 80% of Pyrotechnic Strike's damage. This damage is considered as charge attack damage. His damage output increases by about 20% with his Constellation compared to C5. Most of his constellations provide a nice upgrade to Lyney's personal damage. If you're someone who's planning to pull for Lyney cons, I'd recommend getting either his C1 or C2, then his C6. These constellations provide the most significant upgrade in terms of damage, making them the most valuable ones to get for him. For his combos, most times you'll want to use your elemental skill after gaining prop surplus stacks, as both its damage and healing increases based off them. His most generic combo is doing charge attacks, then QE, then casting his elemental skill. In scenarios when you're using weapons like Polar Star or an artifact set like Vermilion, you can opt to use his burst earlier in the rotation. For example, you can do 2 charge attacks, QE, 2 charge attacks, and E, or QE, a series of charge attacks, and then E. In cases where Lyney's burst isn't active, or maybe you just don't want to use his elemental burst for some reason, you can do charge attacks until max stacks, and then E. If you do end up using Shimenawa's Reminiscence on Lyney, then you can do one of these combos, either E, a series of charge attacks, and then QE, or E and then a series of charge attacks. While the first rotation of these combos doesn't benefit from the prop surplus stacks, following rotations will. Lyney's kit strongly incentivizes him to be played in teams with at least one additional Pyro member. The teams he's in also need to be able to maintain a strong Pyro aura on enemies for his Ascension 4 passive to work, as it requires enemies to already be affected by Pyro to receive its buffs. Therefore, he fits best in a mono Pyro team, with the primary core being him and Bennett. Bennett gives him healing that allows him to keep consuming HP through his prop arrows, as well as an attack buff to increase his damage output. The other two units are flexible and dependent on the utility Lyney needs. Oftentimes, these slots are filled by either a buffer, shielder, or off-field DPS. Firstly, let's cover the buffers. Outside of Bennett, Kazuha is highly valued in these teams as his Ascension 4 buff synergizes very well with mono-element compositions. Alongside this, he can hold 4-piece Viridescent Venera and offer lots of personal damage. Other animal units like Sucrose or Lynette can be decent replacements for him. Sucrose can hold 4-piece Viridescent to provide an elemental resistance shred on enemies. If she's at C6, her elemental burst damage bonus buff can be useful, although its absorption is unreliable due to its inconsistency. Because Sucrose is also a catalyst user, she can hold Thrilling Tales to give Lyney more attack. Lynette can both hold 4-piece Viridescent and offers a minor attack increase through her elemental burst thanks to her Ascension 4 passive. However, she's not as good compared to the previously mentioned options. Next is the shielders. Xiangling is the best choice for this role due to his strong shield and its elemental resistance shred. He is able to hold sets like Tenacity or Archaic Petra to boost Lyney's damage and works well with Lyney's rotations. C4 Yanfei is a decent option as she is both a shielder and a pyro character who allows Lyney to get more damage from his Ascension 4 passive. If you manage to have enough energy for her, she can run Thrilling Tales instead of Prototype Amber to give him more attack. Her main downside is her high energy needs and forcing Lyney to run longer 20-second rotations, which he's not a fan of. Other shielders like Layla, Kirara, and Jinyan exist, but they do have some drawbacks. All their shields only last 12 seconds, which can make some rotations awkward toward the end as Lyney is left vulnerable during these periods. Regardless, at a baseline they provide a shield, so if you have no other options, then they can work. Do note that with Layla and Kirara specifically, it is better to not use their elemental burst to maintain power uptime on enemies. While Thomas seems like a solid flex unit in this spot at a face value, he falls behind most defensive units. The main issue is that his elemental burst shield only refreshes when the active character uses normal attacks. This makes it difficult to both increase his shield strength from his Ascension 1 passive and maintain his C6's damage increase. These factors therefore make him a usable yet not favorable option for Lyney. Honorable mentions in the defensive utility slot include Dehya and Baiju. Dehya doesn't provide a shield but instead interruption resistance with her elemental skill, which also mitigates damage for Lyney. She's also a pyro unit, granting him more damage bonus from his Ascension 4 passive. Her skill's longer cooldown unfortunately extends his team rotation closer to 20 seconds, making her a slightly less desirable option. Baiju provides lots of healing in his elemental skill and burst, and his burst provides a minor shield for Lyney that can block at least one attack each time it refreshes. His Dendro application also triggers burning, which allows for the power aura to be maintained on enemies. He also forces Lyney into 20-second team rotations due to his burst cooldown, and while he has potential to help Lyney stack 4-piece Marachasi Hunter faster, Baiju's excessive healing isn't always needed. Lastly is using Xiangling as your third unit. Although Xiangling extends his team rotation, she offers massive off-field power damage that is useful both in single target and AoE. Her Ascension 4 passive, C1 and C6 buffs make her even more valuable. Using Xiangling, however, makes Lyney more reliant on needing a shielder in the last slot since her elemental burst forces Lyney to be closer to enemies. Now that we've discussed everything to do with Lyney, let's list his strengths and weaknesses as a unit, starting with the strengths. Lyney is a strong and competitive mono pyro DPS that is a nice alternative to clean mono pyro. Especially in situations where you can run triple pyro with Kazuha, he becomes an exceptionally strong unit in single target and small AoE situations. In comparison to other units, he is easier to play as the only mechanic you genuinely need to learn is how to cancel his burst early. I'd say overall he's pretty free to play friendly because we're getting a free Bennett through one of the events, Bennett and Lyney are featured on his banner, and those who don't have Kazuha or Sucrose will get Lyney for free. Xiangling is also another unit that is free, and most players at this stage of the game have at least one defensive unit or at least maybe a shield character in the game. Another is his investment Scaling, as he does gain a lot of damage from his Constellations, farming for his best in slot artifact set, and or giving him a crit or attack percent weapon. He's also very easy to build as he honestly just needs an attack Sands, Pyro Goblet, and crit Circlet. Transitioning over to his weaknesses, one of his main weaknesses is how squishy he is. As a charge attack DPS, not having a shielder or Dehya with him is very risky due to interruption alongside taking more damage from enemies in general. His team compositions are also quite limiting, as the team must provide enough power application or not disrupt said application so that he can take advantage of his Ascension 4 passive. And in said teams, he will always be paired with Bennett and oftentimes Kazuha, which for some can create harsh limitations for the use of certain teams in your second half slot during Abyss runs. Alongside these units, without his Ascension 4 passive, his damage overall plummets. While he has some AoE in his elemental skill and burst, he struggles in content where there's large waves of enemies that require or heavily incentivize his crowd control abilities. Lastly, Lyney on day 1 is not going to feel that great. His best artifact set by a landslide is new, meaning you'll have to farm a good set first. The same goes for his talent and ascension materials. It's going to take some time before your Lyney will be able to reach optimal levels. To end this video off, let's get into the tier ranking and his overall pull value, as I'm sure many are interested as to how well he fits in the general meta. Lyney is a strong pyro DPS carry who can dish out respectable single target and minimal AoE damage. However, his gameplay style as a charge attack bow user won't necessarily be interesting for everyone. Additionally, he has limited team compositions that he works in alongside having a reliance on shields and interruption resistance to perform consistently. Although he has strong single target damage and some AoE damage capabilities, he tends to struggle in large AoE without sufficient grouping or AoE damage from sources like Xiangling's Pyronado. Therefore, I'm deciding to overall put Lyney around the mid A tier. This isn't to say that he's necessarily weak, it's just that a lot of his strengths and weaknesses lie down in the fact that he's very limited in terms of how he can be played and where he can be played. Alright, and that's going to conclude this Lyney guide video. If you did enjoy, then be sure to leave a like, and please correct me or let me know on things that you want to know about Lyney. I would appreciate it in the comments below. And until the next video, which will be on the Battle Pass weapons, bye bye.